the French entered the war with great self-confidence. Neither the public nor the politicians had the slightest doubt about victory. The streets of Paris echoed with cries of "To Berlin! To Berlin!" In one Parisian bookstore, a volume titled French-German Dictionary for the French in Berlin was proudly displayed on the shelf. Soldiers chatted about which German city they wished to march to, while civilians debated how many days it would take to defeat the Germans. The entire nation was a monument to pride and arrogance. France had distributed maps of German cities to every officer in its army. Yet one crucial map had been forgotten: the map of France itself. The stones paving the road to a war that would reshape Europe's destiny were laid not with iron and steel, but with paper and ink. The diplomatic struggle that began with paper among the powers would end with gunpowder. Prussia's carefully calibrated victory over Austria, engineered with Bismarck's precision, had changed the entire game. With the signing of the Treaty of Prague in 1866, the fate of Germany was sealed. According to this agreement, Austria withdrew from the German Confederation, which was thereby dissolved. Germany was divided along the Main River into North and South. A new confederation was formed north of the Main under Prussian leadership. The territories of Schleswig and Holstein became Prussian. Austria renounced all claims to them, and Austria recognized Venice as part of Italy. This war between the two powers completely upended Napoleon III's calculations. The emperor had anticipated a conflict, but not one that would end so swiftly. The French government was horrified by the sudden Prussian victory. Cabinet members pressed Napoleon to act at once and seize the Rhine region. Empress Eugenie agreed, convinced that Bismarck could never be trusted. The Minister of War, Jacques-Louis Randon, shared her view. He told Napoleon that he could raise an army of 250,000 men within weeks, but the emperor, weary and aging, replied that he was no longer capable of leading such a war. Even as Prussia celebrated victory over Austria, France was already grinding its teeth in anticipation of confronting Prussia. After the Treaty of Prague, Prussia moved to sever the German state's ties with Austria and bind them to Berlin. From December 1866 to April 1867, Bismarck met with representatives of the states in Berlin. Describing these efforts as restoring the old glory to the German name, Bismarck combined pressure with diplomacy during the negotiations. By their conclusion, the first step toward the German Empire had been taken. The North German Confederation was proclaimed. With the establishment of the Confederation, German unity was already halfway achieved, but the thorny path was only just beginning. Napoleon III, meanwhile, faced fierce criticism for allowing Prussia's rise. Adolf Thiers, who would later become the first president of the Third Republic, lamented with tears that France had been reduced to a second-rate power. One of Napoleon's close advisors warned him, restrain Prussia's expansion. If war is necessary, do not hesitate. There will never be a greater or more honorable war than this. In September 1865, during a meeting in Biarritz with Napoleon III, Bismarck hinted that France might be allowed to annex parts of Belgium and Luxembourg in exchange for remaining neutral in an upcoming war against Austria. Yet he spoke ambiguously, never committing himself to anything concrete. Napoleon sought to restore his waning prestige through the Biarritz encounter. After all, hadn't Bismarck made certain promises there? But the Prussian statesman had no intention of remembering those conversations. Rejecting the demands of France's ambassador in Berlin, Benedetti, Bismarck firmly declared that not a single inch of land would be ceded. After this rebuff, France made a new proposal in August 1866. Two treaties were to be signed between France and Prussia. The first would recognize France's annexation of Luxembourg. The second would create a military alliance. France would take Belgium, while Prussia would extend its dominion to the River Main. To Bismarck, Prussia needed no such alliance, after all. The only power the French truly feared was Prussia itself. He also understood that completing German unification required bringing the Catholic South German states under control, and that could only be achieved through war with Catholic France. Bismarck remarked, "If the French want Luxembourg and Belgium, they should take them themselves." Napoleon, in fact, had set his mind on Luxembourg. Since the Congress of Vienna, Luxembourg had been part of the German Confederation, but was also under the rule of the Dutch crown. When the Confederation dissolved in 1866, Luxembourg was drawn into the North German Confederation, and Prussian troops were still stationed there. The Dutch viewed this situation with growing anxiety. Thus, in 1867, the Netherlands reached an agreement with France to sell the territory for 90 million francs. The news struck the newly formed North German Confederation like a bomb, for a member state had been sold to another power without the Confederation's consent. Prussia objected vehemently, further straining its already tense relations with France. By now, Napoleon III clearly perceived the growing danger of a unified Germany. The political architecture Bismarck was constructing made a war between France and Germany increasingly inevitable. Yet, although most Prussian generals demanded immediate action, Bismarck knew that a war with France would not be easy. Preparation was everything. Every year that Prussia did not fight France, it added more than 100,000 men to its army. Napoleon, aware of this reality, was haunted by the power Prussia had displayed during the Austrian campaign. "There is no room left for another mistake," lamented Adolf Thiers. Napoleon himself had come to the same conclusion. War could no longer be avoided. Measures had to be taken. The first step was reforming military recruitment. Until then, soldiers were drawn by lottery. Those selected served 7 years. But the system prevented France from mobilizing a large army on short notice. Thus, the lottery was abolished, and compulsory service was introduced, just as in Prussia. Still, Napoleon knew that soldiers alone would not defeat Prussia. Diplomacy had to be used. The most natural ally for France was Austria, which had recently felt Prussia's heavy hand. Napoleon approached Vienna with an alliance offer, but received an unexpected refusal. Austria's situation was dire. It needed a defensive alliance, not an offensive one. Like every empire that had lost a war, it feared renewed nationalist uprisings. Moreover, Russia's pan-slavist policies now posed a serious threat. Nearly half of Austria's population was Slavic. The Austrian Prime Minister, Friedrich Ferdinand von Bost, offered a striking assessment. "We must first seek an alliance within ourselves." France's search for allies thus ended in failure. When the Spanish succession crisis later erupted, the spark that would ignite the war, France still stood alone. At the time, the French military attaché in Berlin wrote to Paris, "The outbreak of war depends on a single spark." He was right. In May 1868, Prussian Minister of War General Helmuth von Moltke declared, "Before the French reach Munich, we shall be in Paris." The long-awaited spark did not take long to appear, for the fire began in Spain. When King Ferdinand died in 1833, his 3-year-old daughter Isabella II succeeded him. But the king's brother, Carlos Maria Isidro, claimed that women could not legally inherit the throne and rebelled, plunging the country into civil war. Don Carlos lost the conflict and never gained the crown, yet his supporters continued the Carlist cause for decades. Spain remained divided between the supporters of Isabella and the Carlists. After years of instability and repression, a military revolt in 1868 deposed Isabella II. A search began for a new, legitimate monarch. The Spanish did not consider a French candidate. France had meddled in Iberian affairs since the days of Napoleon. Instead, the new government looked north, to the Hohenzollern dynasty that ruled Prussia, and offered the crown to Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. The prospect of Leopold ascending the Spanish throne alarmed Napoleon III, who saw France encircled by Hohenzollerns from both north and south. Recognizing France's discomfort, Bismarck, who now judged the time ripe for war, pressed the issue, urging Leopold to accept the crown. But Leopold declined, and King Wilhelm, unwilling to provoke a crisis with France, refused to support the plan. The war Bismarck desired seemed to slip through his fingers. The French had won this round, and the Chancellor's ambitions appeared thwarted. But Bismarck was nothing if not persistent. In early 1870, the Spanish government renewed its offer to Prince Leopold, this time under Bismarck's influence. Leopold again refused. Yet Bismarck kept pressing both Wilhelm and Leopold relentlessly, until finally, on the third attempt, the prince agreed to accept the Spanish crown. The news that Prince Leopold had accepted the crown of Spain hit Paris like a bomb. France's ambassador in Madrid warned Marshal Prim, the man behind Leopold's selection, under the present circumstances, the choice of a Prussian prince cannot fail to produce extraordinary consequences. The Spanish crisis threw France into complete turmoil. In a fiery speech before the chamber, Foreign Minister Duc de Gramont declared, "We cannot believe that a neighbouring nation would disturb the balance of power in Europe to our detriment, that it would endanger France's interests and honour, or that it would try to impose such a situation upon us. We are firmly convinced that this will not happen. To prevent it, we trust in the good sense of the German people and in the friendship of the Spanish people. But if events should unfold otherwise, we shall fulfill our duty without hesitation and without weakness." Gramont's words set the assembly ablaze. Deputies rose to their feet shouting, "Vive la France! Vive l'armée! Vive l'empereur!" A feverish war spirit swept through France. When these declarations reached Prussia, Bismarck turned to the king and said only one thing: "We must order mobilization at once." France began to exert heavy pressure on Prussia to withdraw Leopold's candidacy. After nearly a week of tension, King Wilhelm advised Leopold to renounce the Spanish throne. On July 12, 1870, Leopold's withdrawal was officially announced. Bismarck was stunned. The moment he heard the news, he felt as though he had been struck by lightning. He even considered resigning. "We have received a slap from the French," he fumed, "and our meekness has brought us so low that if we were now to declare war, it would seem as if we were seeking a fight. Yet only war can wipe away this black stain. It is impossible for me to remain Chancellor under these circumstances." But fortune was not done with him yet. It would soon hand Bismarck the opportunity he had been waiting for. France, intoxicated by its diplomatic victory, went one step too far. On the morning of July 13th, French Ambassador Benedetti visited King Wilhelm, who was taking the waters at the spa town of Ems. He demanded a formal guarantee that no Hohenzollern prince would ever again be a candidate for the Spanish throne. The king, taken aback by the request, replied that he could give no such guarantee, neither for himself nor for others. When Benedetti pressed the demand a second time, Wilhelm ended the conversation and refused to see him again. Wilhelm reported the entire exchange to Bismarck through his aide Heinrich Becken, sending what would become one of the most consequential telegrams in history. In Bismarck's skillful hands, this message, destined to shape the fate of a continent, was transformed. The French had indeed made demands under the threat of war, and Wilhelm had refused them. That much was true. But Bismarck shortened the telegram, cutting out the conciliatory phrases and emphasizing the confrontation. In his edited version, Benedetti appeared far more insolent and Wilhelm far more defiant. This subtle manipulation turned the telegram into a national insult, a deliberate provocation that would push France into a fatal blunder. "It will have the effect of a red rag on the Gallic bull," Bismarck remarked with satisfaction. The altered version of the Ems dispatch was released to the press the next day, and exactly as Bismarck predicted, it exploded across Europe. The bomb detonated on a symbolic date, July 14th, the anniversary of the French Revolution. On their national day, the French awoke to what they saw as an unforgivable humiliation. Before even hearing the full story from Ambassador Benedetti, the nation was in uproar. In Paris, crowds filled the streets, surging toward the Prussian embassy in fury. The M's telegram caused shockwaves not only in France but also in Germany. For the proud and independent South German states, the issue was now one of national honor, of Germanness itself. That same day, the Prussian envoy in Paris was ordered to leave the country immediately. Across both nations, patriotic songs filled the streets as citizens cursed their enemies. The Rubicon had been crossed. On July 15th, France issued the order for general mobilization. In response, the North German Confederation followed suit without delay, soon joined by Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg. The French army in peacetime numbered over 400,000 men, composed partly of regular troops and partly of conscripts drawn by lottery. Many believed that number should rise to 1 million. But France was also forced to station troops in its restive colonies, especially in Algeria, and thus could muster only 290,000 men against Prussia. Seeing the danger, Marshal Adolf Neil moved quickly to introduce reforms, creating a system of compulsory military service modelled on Prussia's, but shorter in duration. Men previously exempt from service were drafted into a new force, the Garde Mobile. France's answer to the German Landwehr, a national guard designed to reinforce the main army. Calculations aimed for a total strength of 800,000, but the reforms were incomplete when war erupted. France was about to enter the conflict in a state of utter disarray, without its reserves, without full mobilization, and without a clear plan. The Prussian army, by contrast, was far more orderly. It was directed by the General Staff under General Helmuth von Moltke. Moltke made heavy use of new technologies, especially railways and the telegraph, to coordinate and accelerate the mobilization of large forces. The French war plan had been drawn up by Marshal Niel. The original aim was the Rhineland. That plan was abandoned, however. It was expected that the South German states and Austria would take up a revenge war against Prussia once the German revolt flared. The French would join them and, together with Austro-Hungarian forces, liberate all of southern Germany. Napoleon and his command, however, misread the situation. Whatever else happened, the southern Germans would act as Germans, and Austria, in its present state, had no desire to enter such a war. From start to finish, the war proved a disaster for France. The first attack came from the French. An advance into the Saar penetrated a few kilometers, but the French progress was short-lived because of severe strategic and intelligence errors. Under Moltke's command, Prussia counterattacked and began to inflict a terrible defeat on the French. In a series of August battles, the Prussians achieved successes on French soil. The unwarranted confidence of some French generals, combined with Prussian superior coordination, forced the French army to retreat. But the worst was yet to come for France. Napoleon and Marshal MacMahon formed the Army of Chalons to rescue General Bazaine, who had been trapped at Metz with tens of thousands of men. Napoleon personally directed the army alongside Marshal MacMahon. The Army of Chalons moved toward the Belgian frontier. The Prussians used this maneuver to encircle the French. Moltke, with the Prussian Third Army, advanced on Napoleon and his force and caught them on the 30th of August at Beaumont. In that first engagement, the French suffered some 5,000 casualties and then fell back towards Sedan. Reforming at Sedan, the French were still unaware of the full scale of the disaster about to overtake them. The approaching Prussian forces immediately surrounded the town and, together with Napoleon, closed the ring around the French army. The king ordered the army to withdraw before being completely encircled. But by then it was too late. On the 1st of September 1870, The day Napoleon's name would be erased from history, the French army fought with heroic courage. Prussian commander von Moltke unleashed a force of 200,000 men and 800 guns against the French at Sedan. King Wilhelm and Chancellor Otto von Bismarck watched the fighting from the nearby heights of Frenois, witnessing events as they unfolded. The French repeatedly tried to break the encirclement, but persistent command and control failures, conflicting orders given to different commanders, kept them from success. Even so, the French resistance there won the respect of the Prussians. Observing from the Frenois heights, King Wilhelm praised the cavalry under General Marguerite, exclaiming, "What heroic men!" when he saw their bravery in the fighting. Napoleon, who had been in a dreadful state even on the first day of the war, did not wish to see more bloodshed. To spare his troops further slaughter and to avoid the shame his generals might feel at surrendering, he decided to allow himself to be taken prisoner. That afternoon, Napoleon sent a note to King Wilhelm of Prussia. Mon frère, puisque je n'ai pas réussi à mourir au milieu de mes soldats, il ne me reste plus qu'à placer mon épée entre tes mains. At 8 o'clock the next morning, the Emperor stepped into the carriage that would take him to King Wilhelm's headquarters. Upon hearing that Napoleon was on his way, Chancellor Bismarck rode out to meet him. The two men met in a small house and spoke with mutual courtesy about the war. Yet when Bismarck realized that the Emperor hoped to negotiate personally with the king, he told him bluntly that Wilhelm would only receive him after he had signed an unconditional act of surrender. Around noon, General de Wimpfen and General von Moltke signed the terms of capitulation in the presence of both the Emperor and the Prussian king. According to these terms, the French army would surrender all its flags, cannons, weapons, equipment, and the fortress itself to Prussia. 80,000 prisoners would be taken into Prussian custody. Emperor Napoleon III himself became a prisoner of war and was taken to Germany, where he would spend 6 months in captivity. When Empress Eugenie received the news that her husband and his army had been captured, she was devastated. She reportedly screamed at the Emperor's personal aide, "No, an emperor does not surrender. He is dead. They are hiding it from me. Why? Has he not taken his own life? Does he not know he has dishonored himself?" He learned that his empire had collapsed and that Leon Gambetta had proclaimed the Third Republic on the 4th of September. Seeing the angry crowds gather near the palace, Eugenie fled, unwilling to share the fate that had befallen Marie Antoinette nearly a century earlier. For her husband, Sedan had become what Waterloo had been for his uncle. From that moment onward, France would be a republic once more. When news of Napoleon's surrender reached Paris, the Second Empire was swept away by popular revolt. On the 4th of September, Jules Favre, Léon Gambetta, and General Louis-Jules Trochu proclaimed the Government of National Defense, the provisional administration of the Third Republic. Bismarck was under a great illusion in those days. He believed the war was effectively over and that peace negotiations should soon begin. But on the 6th of September, Jules Favre, speaking on behalf of the new government, issued a defiant statement. France will not yield 1 inch of her territory, nor a single stone of her fortresses. Prussia, seeing no other option, decided to continue the war. Yet there was hardly any enemy left to fight. The Prussian armies advancing through France met almost no organized resistance, since another key French force, the Army of the Rhine under Bazaine, numbering about 200,000 men, had also surrendered at Metz. With France in disarray, Prussian forces began the siege of Paris on the 19th of September 1870. The encircled French government called upon the provinces to raise new armies that would march to relieve the capital. Bismarck, however, urged the army to bombard the city at once. Each passing day, he feared, could turn the situation against Prussia. Neutral powers might intervene. The Chancellor insisted that the war must be ended as swiftly as possible. But the Prussian High Command refused, citing moral reasons, and no devastating bombardment was carried out. Conditions inside the besieged city grew horrific. Hunger, cold, and disease tormented the population, yet resistance against the Germans remained fierce. Still, Paris could not hold out forever. On the 26th of January 1871, the Government of National Defense entered into an armistice with the Prussians. Public opinion in Paris was violently opposed to any surrender or concession, but the government realized it could no longer sustain the defense. The expected relief armies were nowhere in sight and would likely never come. 2 days later, Favre signed the capitulation at Versailles, and the ceasefire took effect at midnight. This war would lay the foundations of a new age, one that would forever alter European and world history. For years, the Prussians had fought for the dream of a united Germany, and now they had achieved it. Throughout the 19th century, Prussia and Austria had vied for leadership of the German world. Under Bismarck, Prussia had pursued near-flawless strategy. But its greatest rival, France, had now been humiliated and brought to its knees. During this national war, many German states, though not officially united, had fought effectively as one under Prussia's command. It was time to give this unity a name. While victory was assured and Paris was still under siege, the Prussian parliament voted to bestow upon King Wilhelm the title of Kaiser and to rename the country the German Reich. The law passed on the 1st of January 1871, and the Imperial Proclamation was scheduled for the 18th of January 1871, a date chosen with purpose. On that same day in 1701, Elector Frederick of Brandenburg had crowned himself King Frederick, the first of Prussia, founding the Prussian kingdom. At the Palace of Versailles, which had witnessed so many of Europe's decisive moments, the German Empire was born. German banners, worn and torn by battle, were raised high in triumph, as the assembled soldiers and princes realized they were witnessing the dawn of a new era. Otto von Bismarck read aloud the Imperial Proclamation. Immediately afterward, Grand Duke Frederick of Baden, Wilhelm's only son-in-law, shouted, "Long live His Majesty, Kaiser Wilhelm." The hall echoed as the assembled voices repeated it 3 times. Europe watched with anxious eyes as one empire fell and another arose from its ashes. Over his 9 years as Prime Minister, Otto von Bismarck had accomplished extraordinary feats. He was no longer merely the Minister-President of Prussia, but now the Chancellor of the German Empire. He had many enemies, both foreign and domestic, yet, as he'd said back in 1866, he defeated them all. One might have thought Bismarck's path would now be easier, but the world was not so kind. He had created a new power, a titan among nations, and with it, new enemies and new desires for revenge. The years after 1871 could be called Bismarck's dream, but soon enough, Europe's shifting realities would turn that dream into something else entirely, the beginning of Bismarck's nightmare.